Welcome to Identity Unboxed, where we provide mentorship and promote representation for Black professionals in the advancement of the Black community.
We are seeking guidance from exceptional Black leaders, scholars, and professionals with expertise in their respective fields.
We hope to foster a space that promotes authenticity, inclusivity, and restoration for our listeners while exploring the intersection of our personal and professional lives.
This project is a culmination of our lived experiences as young Black professionals to transform our life trajectories, to overcome adversity and reach triumph.
Our intention is to inspire you on your path to discovering your purpose. All right. Well, hello, Rico. We are so grateful to be sitting here with you today. You are the Director of the Office of Planning and Community Development at the City of Seattle, a founding member of the National Organization of Minority Architects, Northwest Chapter, and an urban development professional. And we are just looking forward to having a vibrant discussion with you about your career journey and to hear how your identity has influenced your personal and professional life and your approach to your work. Our first question for you would be, for those who may be unfamiliar, what is the Office of Planning and Development, and what is its role in creating a more vibrant future for our city?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you both for inviting me to be a part of this discussion. And thank you for creating this the podcast. I think that it's a great venue for both young Black leadership and seasoned professionals to be able to come into a space and talk about what we believe in and what's important to us and what our struggles are and what it is that we're doing out in the world. So I just really appreciate that. So to answer your first question, so just a little bit of background. So I was a practicing architect for 27 years before joining city government. I just joined the city of Seattle as the interim and now acting director, or I'm sorry, interim and then acting and now permanent director for the Office of Planning and Community Development. 3 years ago is when I started. We are an office of 50 people. We have 4 divisions. So we have land use policy division. We have long range planning. We have community planning. And finally, we have an equitable development initiative where we invest about $20 million a year in community-led, BIPOC organization-led development projects across the city, which is a program we're very proud of because we're trying, through that program, we're not only trying to elevate Black and Brown voices across the city, we're trying to slow displacement in the city and ensure that BIPOC organizations have a place to stay and have a way to serve our diverse communities in the city. I should mention one of our most important functions that we perform at the city is to manage our comprehensive plan for the city, which is a plan that cross-coordinates all of our departments, and we have 40 of them at the city. We, by the way, are a city we have over 12,000 staff at the city, which is larger than most cities across the state. So it's that plan is very large in its consideration. Within that plan, we also manage our growth strategy within the framework of the Puget Sound Regional Council's requirement that we plan for how the city will grow over the course of 20 years. That's a plan that we update every 8 to 10 years. It used to be on an 8-year cycle. Now it's on a 10-year cycle. We are working on that update now. We have a website that people can go to provide their input. And then come the first quarter of 2024, our intent is to release a draft plan and do a whole bunch of community engagement to get people's thoughts on what they think the city should be doing as the city continues to grow and evolve.
That's amazing. It's community feedback is so important, and that's something that we need more of in general, and every department and to take seriously, because in public service, we're serving the people. So I appreciate that you're leading that charge, and, you're doing what needs to be done to make Seattle a more vibrant city. And I know you've been hard at work over the last 27 years. You've had, quite a career. For the last 27 years, you've been working to revitalize and reimagine historic landmarks and neighborhoods in Seattle. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little more about this 27-year journey and what led you to be the director at OPCD.
Thank you for the question. So I'm a born and raised Seattleite. I grew up on the east side in Kirkland. I went to Washington University in St. Louis for my undergraduate, frankly, in part to get as far away from my my experience as a frankly, as a small Black child in white suburbia. Like I wanted a different experience where I could explore what it meant to be Black for myself. I was one of a class of 10 urban scholars that was a part of the program at WashU that year. I was there in St. Louis for 5 years. I was in the architecture program there for 4, and I double majored in Afro-American studies and in architecture, partially because I knew that in coming back to Seattle, that what I wanted to be able to do was invest in social change through built environment projects. In coming back, I did my graduate work at the University of Washington, and for my thesis, I worked with the then not-for-profit that was seeking to create a African-American museum to document what the Northwest journey and Northwest experience is for African-American families and African-American history here. That is what we now know as NAM. I was able to work on the project as a student. While at a community meeting, I met a great community leader who was also an architect, Donald King. I interviewed him for my thesis. He interviewed me for a job. He was very much a mentor for me, and we did work in the community together for about 17 years. And then after doing a whole host of great projects together, we had to close our firm in 2013 due to kind of a delayed response to the 2008 recession. It like became harder and harder to keep our doors open. I worked for an international firm, DLR Group, for 7 years. Great practice, helped grow their civic practice. the largest project I got to do there was with the city of Seattle. Got to re-envision part of the Century 21 plan on the Seattle Center campus. I was the local architect for the Climate Pledge Arena. And after that project was done, it was the summer of 2020. So it was not long after the tragedy of George Floyd. I'd been getting bookings both locally and nationally to talk about what was the role of Black architects and architects in general to make a change in our cities across the nation, and be a part of social justice. I got a call. I got an email that I thought was spam, realized it wasn't. I responded to it. I got a meeting with the then mayor, Mayor Durkin, for the city of Seattle, who, after 45 minutes of conversation, asked me what would it take to get me to join the city. Not a question that I was expecting, although like I had contemplated city government before. That led to me making a change. 4 months after that phone call, I joined the city. I joined the staff at LPCD, and then found myself in the director's position just 2 months after I had joined the city staff.
Wow, thank you so much, Rico, for taking us through your journey. And would you be open to sharing a little bit about your thought process from pivoting from, the private architecture firm to public service, and kind of, what was that driving force for you in that decision?
I've always, I don't know where this drive comes from, but I have always thought to find highest and best use for myself.
Mm-hmm.
What are the ways that I could be an effective leader, civically engaged, contributing to my community, trying to make lives better for others. And I think looking at the trajectory of my career to date, I have always tried to leverage whatever position I was in at any given point in time to get to a stronger place of influence and effectiveness, later down the road. So, I was an intern architect. I was a project architect. I became a manager, and then a principal and owner alongside Donald King in our Black-owned firm. And then after leaving DKA Architecture, I had the opportunity to build this regional practice, which then began to have influence within the national discussion that the firm was upholding at DLR Group. This opportunity to join the city city staff was an opportunity really to level up. So to have an opportunity to represent the needs of a city that now is almost 800,000 people, particularly the needs of our BIPOC communities and communities of color that have been traditionally underserved and under-resourced. was too hard to pass up. And it is very different, like being an architect, a designer, and a consultant. Um, you have the great opportunity to work with owners, property owners, building owners, and a team of designers and a development team to make a single site solution happen. A building, a park, a community center, a gathering space. And, like some of my most prideful moments have been driving through the city and being able to point out projects that I was a part of to my kids, who are now 17, and don't really care what I'm doing, but they did when they were younger. Making a transition from that like very tangible work to now being invested in policy work for the entire city. It's definitely more abstract, definitely less tangible in the day to day. But what I know is that the impact of it is great, and it's the duration of the decisions that we make affect families, neighborhoods, people's livelihood for decades. And that is a very compelling thing to be a part of. I mean, high pressure, but very desirable.
That is so amazing to hear of the impact that you're able to make, and to be able to drive those decisions and really guide the initiatives that you would like to see, serving communities that are marginalized, and having that representation, I believe, is so important. So that's so great to hear. And moving forward, just touching a bit more on your background growing up in the Central District and the East Side. You mentioned in your 2020 TED Talk that you were open about growing up in the CD, a historically Black neighborhood in Seattle that is often gone under-resourced. Can you elaborate on this lived experience and the differences you noticed after relocating to suburbia?
Well, I definitely can talk about the differences that I saw. I have to admit that I left. My parents made the hard decision to leave the Central District when I was pretty young. So it was pre-K, in fact, and we moved to Renton for a few years. Moved to Kirkland when I right before entering second grade. So I think that I have very happy memories as a young child in the CD. I think that my real experience, kind of my understanding of like neighborhood and community and all of that, was really informed while going through my undergraduate education in St. Louis, and then coming back to Seattle and living in the city proper again, and then doing my thesis on the CD and beginning to work there. The East Side, still to this day is very much a car culture, and a lot. I mean, Kirkland and Woodinville, at least, were not very diverse communities. The Central District 20 years ago was 75% Black families. Now, what's upsetting about that is that today, due to a terrible history that the city has of redlining and gentrification, and kind of the pressures of development, there are only 20% Black families left in the city. And so we're trying to figure out ways to bring people back, bring diverse communities back to the city. I think that so that's a big effort and a big change. I in coming back to Seattle after doing my undergraduate work, I knew that I wanted to be connected to the CD, which I felt like was my home. And there were a lot of really good reasons that my parents made the investment in myself and my sister to move away at the time and to put us on the track for a college education. But I think, making the investment in the Northwest African American Museum and so many other projects that Donald and I were able to do together in the CD, it's been really meaningful to be a part of the vision for what for us, by us looks like, what not-for-profits serving communities of color, BIPOC-led organizations, including great organizations like Africa Town, led by White King, like seeing us work together, frankly, with limited resource and finding ways to bring together a bunch of parts and pieces to realize a larger vision with greater outcomes across the CD has been just really meaningful.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you for leading that work and also explaining that shared vision, getting nonprofits and Black-led orgs and BIPOC orgs to come together and really collaborate on, the efforts that we need to make. One thing that Tiana and I kind of discussed before, we always have our little conversations about the podcast and, we just had these discussions about how, there needs to be more cohesion amongst the community and these organizations because, we're so much stronger together. And a lot of times we find ourselves competing for resources, for money, for grants. And so it kind of turns into this, competitive cycle rather than, hey, we can actually pull this together and actually, try to lift ourselves out the mud. And so I really appreciate that. That's, the direction that we're starting to be able to move towards.
Well, and there's an unfortunate scarcity model there where we get pitted against each other for a limited pool of resources. And I think that the challenge is very much to your point, like how do we work together so that we can all be a part of building generational wealth, all be a part of creating a better future for ourselves individually, for our families, and for our community. And it's not easy. And there are competing perspectives. We don't always see things the same. And we oftentimes have differing needs, and working through all of that can be really hard, particularly in times of economic distress. So I appreciate that you raised that, and I don't think that there's never going to be any easy answers there. But I think that it was the community that asked for the creation of the Equitable Development Initiative program probably 7.5 years ago now. That was a program that started at $5 million a year, that our budget next year will be closer to 25 million.
Wow.
Like we are, I mean, I feel very fortunate that we have these resources available to us. I can also say that we are showing success, which the promise of it is the opportunity for greater investments. So I do think that I mean, there is a lesson in there about all of us pooling together and working together and combining our voices, and what the power of that really can be.
Absolutely. And I think that leads good into our next question, but also kind of taking a different approach on, that spin on collaboration and just in making a vision for our future in the city. According to, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, various studies show that people living near parks and green spaces in nature have less mental distress. They're more physically active. They have extended lifespans and overall just a better, quality of life. From your perspective and experience, how do you feel that we can move forward and get to a future where more nature is infused and incorporated in our urban hubs and in our cities, so that people, can really immerse themselves in natures more as our cities grow and expand and as our population grows?
So I think this all boils down to partnership ultimately, and that's partnership of the city with community, and it's also partnership across our city departments. So it's kind of amazing. I was just in a meeting with some of the staff at Seattle Parks, our Office of Parks and Recreation for the city of Seattle, and I think what I learned is that the city of Seattle has 500 sites and assets that are part of Parks portfolio, which is a lot. I think that whether it's a large urban site like Cal Anderson Park, or it's a small pocket park that maybe it used to be a home site that's now an infill green site essentially, or a former parking lot site that's been turned into a pea patch. I think there's lots of opportunities for both experiencing green across the city or creating opportunities for the re-greening of the city, if you will. Our Office of Sustainability is invested in our tree canopy across the city, because not only does it have to do with a quality of life and beautification of the city, it also contributes to our mental and physical health, and carbon sequestration. So SDOT has Seattle Department of Transportation has their own tree planting program as part of the public right of way, and then Seattle Public Schools has all of their sites that have large green components to them, and they're serving families and children. So there's a number of city entities and departments that are all contributing to that larger vision for a green infrastructure and a green city. And I think that as it relates to the partnership with community, again, whether it's P-Patch, which is a community garden where you go to Department of Neighborhoods, another department that's invested in this vision, and get involved through in the P-Patch program through DON, or it's going to Seattle Parks and asking for a continued investment or a new investment in an existing neighborhood park or new park that you want to see happen, or a infill site that you think should be turned into a park, or having a conversation with the city about what sort of restorative programming, be that about people growing their own food or plants that have been historically grown on sites in Seattle that we don't tend to see any longer. I think there's a lot of opportunities for families and communities to be involved with the city and to collaborate to do projects that are about or basically an urban green and urban canopy.
That's great. And I had a question, Rico, pertaining to advancing tangible efforts related to urban planning. When there are so many decentralized offices working on some of these projects, what do you think is a core component that's necessary to actually get the work done? I know that you've shared so many, amazing things that are happening, but what do you think is that, like critical piece to make sure that all of these projects really do see that end result that you'd like?
I mean, it's a good question. I think there's a couple key components. There's not any singular silver bullet, but advocacy is huge, right? So a community having a vision for what they want, or at least what they need that they don't feel that they're receiving, matters. Having a often having a organization that is that has some, like a not-for-profit that has some level of resource or a mission that's aligned with that community vision, can be a organizing entity for creating a community movement that becomes that point of advocacy for elected officials and city staff to be able to collaborate with and support. I because of the capitalist society that we live in, I can't ignore the fact that money is always going to be a factor, right? I think that oftentimes being able to, if you can create a vision for people to rally around, then you can also take that vision, be it which part of it will be a verbal narrative, part of it will be a written narrative, part of it will be a graphic vision that can be put together by consultants, by community artists. All of that being brought together can then be leveraged to pursue grant money to start a project, pursue city funds to start a thing, and to leverage philanthropic funding as well. And then, like these things build on themselves. What starts as a small community grant for $5,000 or $75,000. We give out small grants through our EDI program for initial visioning for projects. Those smaller investments can then be leveraged for larger investments. So I think it's a combination of vision, dedication, advocacy, and funding.
Thank you so much for breaking that all down. And it sounds like one of the themes is also building a relationship with those communities so that you're able to craft, compelling stories and yield some of those funds that you'd like. So that's great. Moving forward, kind of building on that point of the advocacy, that was something that led to the Equitable Development Initiative that your office put forward recently, and it provides financial support for capacity building in community-based organizations representing historically underserved communities, communities of color, and communities at risk of displacement, which you discussed a little bit ago. Could you elaborate on this initiative a bit more and share how underserved communities can utilize this, and also how it may benefit them as well?
Sure. So I talked a little bit about EDI already. Like I had mentioned, this was a initiative that originally was born out of the last time that the city did a major upzone, and when we did that, we asked. So I think that when we were convening this conversation with the community, that was probably 2015. The conversation was, if we're doing this upzone and if that's going to bring more developers to the city, how do we mediate against that as it relates to displacement? And that's where there was a series of organizations that came together to say to the city, like, that this is what we need, is investment in community, and you can invest in lots of ways. Money happens to be one of them. I think that, just to jump ahead to speak to your, like, how does it benefit communities? As Black families are looking at, what the rate of taxation is, like what the cost of living is to remain in the city of Seattle, whether they have access to a home, access to capital, whether they have opportunities to build generational wealth. This investment in BIPOC not-for-profits and their ability to build generational wealth and build permanent places for their organizations to stay, that relates back to families, because so many of those organizations are providing resources that those families need. Sometimes that's childcare related, sometimes that's maternity related, sometimes it's just the creation of cultural spaces for gathering, sometimes it's arts and culture related. We also have a program that's not in EDI, but it was separate legislation that we wrote a couple of years ago to allow any church that owns property to do an affordable housing development without having to go through a separate land use, mass use planning process to get a permit to do that kind of work. What we're trying to do is find ways to work with organizations that are serving the Black community to provide them the resource so that they don't get pushed out, because by them staying, that helps others to stay as well.
Thank you so much. And I think that's a great segue into our next question, just on this topic, and it can kind of build on it. According to recent data provided by Zillow, the median rent in Seattle is $2,080 per month, and that's 4% higher than the national median. Many people, particularly the younger generations, are losing hope in being able to afford their own space, as most apartments require you to make 3 times the rental rate. I know this especially as a single young person. It's very hard these days to live independently because a lot of people have dual income, and the market kind of like takes that into consideration. But it's like, what about us? So keeping that in mind, as the middle class continues to get priced out of the city, what solutions do you find most effective in generating resources for low-income communities as gentrification continues? We are so grateful for your support, and thank you for listening to Identity Unboxed.
Authenticity is your guide to cast an impact on the world that you will be proud of. Signing off with pride, Tiana
and Brad.
Thank you so much.